So you've learned React, you've built a couple of projects, you know your way around the library, right? You can make components, hooks, and just kind of piece things together to make up a UI. So now comes the next step, right? What next? What should you learn or focus your time on after learning React? So in this video, that's exactly what I want to guide you on and kind of give you my advice as to what I think you should spend your time on, all with the goals of making you a better overall React developer. And speaking of becoming a better React developer, I'm going to sponsor this video once again myself and talk to you about my free newsletter called Import React, which as the name implies is all about React. You can use it to stay up to date with the latest and greatest in the React world, which I honestly do personally, and also get cool tips and tricks and unique stuff that I'm not going to share anywhere else. If you're interested, it's completely free and I've left a link for you down in the description. Now, let's get into the video. So you've learned React. First of all, congratulations. That's something that you should honestly be proud of, right? Knowing how to build an application and deploy it and spin up a UI with React is something that, takes a lot of work. And the fact that you've gotten there is super, super cool. So let's put React here. Now, obviously comes the next step, right? What should you focus your time on after learning React? And the truth is there's not one singular answer and one order of things that you need to focus your time on. Ultimately, a lot of these things are going to depend on you and your preferences and what you actually care about the most. So feel free, out of all the things that I talk about, if there's some that you don't care about, don't really focus on them, it's fine. And if there are others that you care about the most, focus on those. Ultimately, at the end, you're going to learn all of these things one way or another. So just focus on what you like the most first. I think that's going to make it easiest for you to actually stick to it. So the first thing that I would really recommend is something that, you're going to face regardless of whether you like it or not, just because of the nature of it. And that is going to be here. I'm going to make a new bubble. That is going to be data fetching. Data fetching is something that most React applications are going to actually need at some point or another, right? We have React applications where have to show some data, and more often than not, that data is going to come from somewhere, right? So going from React, just the basics, to data fetching is kind of a natural progression. And data fetching is really important because it's not just about how you handle the data fetching in terms of React, but it's also all the things that you need to think about when it comes to data fetching. For example, let me put here some text. For example, you can have this concept of caching in data fetching, right? Caching essentially means if you've already fetched the data once a couple of minutes ago, let's say, or depending on the requirements, you shouldn't necessarily refetch the same data, re-hit your backend again. So you would implement a caching layer, usually through something like React Query, right? So understanding that whole process, right, is not specific to React, but is going to directly impact how you build applications with React, because again, most applications will need to use some sort of data fetching. Data fetching is also going to force you to work a lot with promises and async stuff in JavaScript. So promises, and then we're going to put your async like this. Right, these are code that runs asynchronously, which means that you have to await the data, and that has an implication as to how your JavaScript code actually works in your components, in your hooks, or wherever else you're using them in React. And fun fact, when I started with React, I had no idea about promises and async. I thought all code just ran because if it is on the next line, the data has to be there. So I didn't even understand this concept, right? And that shot me in the foot later on because I had a lot of bugs that I had to debug, and I honestly had no idea what I was doing, right? So getting familiar with promises, how to await promises, how to actually work with the promise object, how to resolve or reject the promise are all super important things that, again, you're going to end up hitting one way or another as you work in React. And then something that maybe isn't talked about that much that I still think is very important is the concept of URL params. URL parameters is something that if you're doing data fetching, you're going to usually have to work with, right? Because your data, if you're fetching some data, chances are you're not just going to fetch the raw endpoint without providing it any sort of parameters, right? You're going to provide it some filters, some pagination, whatever, and those usually will come from the URL parameters. We are building most of all web applications, and so we have a URL, and based on the URL, you're going to get data. So understanding how to work with the URL parameters, how to update them, how to get data from them and manage that whole thing, how to use them as a state management solution, if you will, is also a concept that I would recommend that you spend some time on, at least being familiar with it. Then once you have that down, you can kind of go into another topic, and here I'm going to put it at the side because again, this is not meant to be in any specific order. This one is going to be project architecture, right? And this is also something very important because, again, if you are going to be building React applications, you are going to have to deal with the architecture of the project, right? There's a lot of things that goes into this topic, and it's something that is going to take you years to truly master and to truly understand, but you should start as soon as possible, in my opinion, because again, if you're building a React application, you inherently have to have some sort of project architecture, right? And here that means you have things like folder structures, right, which is really an important concept. Although it's not really going to matter what the user sees, it is going to impact how the actual development of the application happens. And if you have many developers, this starts to become really an issue if it's not handled properly, right? So you have folder structures. Then you also have component structures, which again, just like folder structures, is not about the folders, but about the actual components. So what data does each component have? What hooks do each component have? Where are they placed within the project? So that goes into like folder structures as well. What do the components do? What are your presentational components? So the ones that just show UI, and what are the ones that have state and functionality in them? And how do you structure all of these things is ultimately what is going to determine the quality of your overall project architecture, which is going to impact how the development of the project actually goes. And then also as a byproduct, you're also going to have to deal with state management, which is also something that kind of fits into project architecture because you may or may not need state management, right? Depending on the project. Maybe your components are going to be the ones responsible for the state. Maybe you're going to have some shared state. Maybe you're going to have context, which ultimately is another form of component, right? How do you put those in folders, right? All of these things kind of relate to the general project architecture. And finally, still in this topic, I guess the favorite keyword that all of you like to use, and the reason why I'm also building an entire course on this, is design patterns, right? Which also follows into the project architecture. And this, I would say, kind of overlaps with everything else, right? Design patterns is how do you structure the component, what patterns do you use for the hooks and stuff like that. It kind of overlaps with a bunch of these things, right? So I'm just putting it here because it is a keyword, but it's also very important. And generally you want to be familiar with all of these concepts in your project. Then once you kind of cover these things, then what you should move on to do is the backend of things. So all the server stuff, all the, stuff that is not purely front-end React. So we're going to put your backend like this. The backend, now that React, especially modern React, is kind of split in between this client and server, it's no longer enough, and it's going to be less so the case that is going to be enough for you to be purely a front-end React developer that does not work with the backend at all. Because now with modern React, right, we also have React on the server, which literally means that we're running our React components on the server, and we're no longer sending the JavaScript bundle to the client, to the user. Instead, we're sending the result that was generated from the actual component as raw HTML. And so now working in the server is a completely different environment, and there's a lot of things that are important to know if you're going to be a real React developer. So here I'm going to put full stack React, because that's really what you want to be as a React developer. You want to be a full stack React developer that can build a backend, that can build a frontend, that can connect the pieces together in a way that is efficient and deploy that as a one unit of a project. And honestly, the easiest way for you to do that right now is by using Next.js, right? Next.js, if you haven't heard somehow, if you've been living under a rock, is a framework, is a full stack React framework. It's the one that is the most recommended even on the React docs, and it's the one that is going to make it as easy as possible for you to write React on a server. You get access to server components, server actions, you can have both client and server boundaries, and you can manage all of that. And it's really kind of the one-stop solution for you to develop full stack React. So if you want to get into the backend, if you're interested about this, I highly recommend going with Next.js, because at the time of filming this video, it is the best solution that you can adopt. Working on the backend also means that you're going to now have to interact with the database, right? So every single application, usually, if you want to store some data, will need to have access to a database that can only live and be talked to from a backend. So now even in server components, you can connect and get data from a database directly. So you want to know how to actually run a database, how to query a database, how to set it up. You want to know how to like join tables between them, and also handle all of these security implications that comes with directly connecting to a database, right? You don't want to connect to a database from a client component because you're potentially exposing all of your secrets and passwords and so on. So understanding how to do that, how to manage all of that is something that comes inevitably when you're working with in the backend in React. And then the last thing that I want to mention when it comes to backend is of course authentication, right? Or authorization, but ultimately the concept of authenticating a user, making sure that they are who they say they are, and also making sure that they can actually perform the specific actions that they are trying to perform. This is something that is obviously very important, right? Most backends, I think, if not all backends, should have authentication. It usually works with a database. You can do it with Next.js. You can do it with some other libraries and providers. But generally, the concept of authentication is as important, I would say, as the concept of a backend in general. And then after that, we're now going to go a little bit more into like some advanced topics that are not really necessary for you as a React developer, but you're going to end up inevitably learning about them the more that you spend your time working with React and all of these things. And here it's going to be build, tools, and workflows, right? So build, tools, and workflows, right? So we're all using pretty much Vite, right? If we're building client-side applications, or if you're doing full stack, you're using Next.js or React Router or whatever, right? Understanding those tools, how they work, maybe even the underlying frameworks and libraries that they are based on, right? I think is important just as a foundational computer science knowledge, if you will, that will trickle down into whatever else that you're doing up this kind of hierarchy of knowledge. Right, so for example, you have Vite over here, right? Understanding how Vite works under the hood is not necessarily going to make you a better React developer per se, but having that understanding is going to open up your general arsenal of knowledge, which may indirectly at some point help you with something specific that you're doing in React or in project architecture or whatever else that you're doing, right? And generally, if you've already learned all of these things and you're kind of good, this kind of inevitably happens on its own, but I still wanted to mention it so that you have it in your head so that if you have a specific interest in these things, you can spend a little bit more time trying to read up on them and just educating yourself. And there's other things like Webpack. You also have things like Webpack and TurboPack. And kind of if you want to dive down that rabbit hole, you can. It's pretty interesting. I'm not an expert myself, but if you want to, you also can. And then I also want to mention here Babel, which is also something that we use very often. Again, not directly, but a lot of our tools actually use this under the hood to just convert our JavaScript and just make sure that it runs properly in the browser, right? So these, again, are things that you not necessarily have to be an expert in. You will inevitably run into them as you actually work in React. And it's good to just at least be aware and familiar about them. And then finally, the last one that I want to kind of talk about is also very important. It's UI and UX. And this is something that you're not necessarily going to, focus on exclusively, like you're not a UI designer, right? But you are going to be working with UI designers. And at the end of the day, you are going to be building user interfaces. So understanding UI and how that whole world kind of runs is also very important, right? So that's usually things like design systems, which you're going to work with a lot if you actually have a proper team with a proper project. You're going to have a standardized design system, which just means that you have specific components with specific font sizes and colors, and you have a whole system for your design. And it's your job as a developer to implement that design system in the code and make sure that it runs super efficiently based on what the designers actually need. Right, so you're going to be working a lot with designers as well. So that's also something important, right? It's actually worth putting here, designers. Because, right, you're not a designer yourself, but you are going to be working with a lot with them. And then also you want to at least be familiar with Figma and how that works, because all of these designers essentially use it and they just want to use that, right? Figma is kind of a Photoshop for design. You can create applications and mock-up designs. Maybe you've already worked with it, right? If you've worked with a designer, and usually your job is to take those designs and then put them into code and optionally create a design system for it if you have one implemented. So understanding Figma, how it works, even understanding how to actually get stuff from Figma to code, because there are tools that enable you to do that, is also something that you want to look into, because maybe there's something in your company, a use case in your company that requires you to automate this entire process, right? So knowing how to do it, or at least knowing how it's done and that it's possible, is also something that is very important. And with that, I think we kind of covered all of the important things that at least I wanted to talk about. Once again, this is not an exhaustive list. There's obviously a lot more that you can do and that you can spend your time on. But really what's important here is not that you go and tick off all of these boxes, because again, that's virtually impossible, but rather that you get familiar with these and that you can work with these and you find the areas that you want to specialize yourself in, right? Maybe you like data fetching a lot, so you want to focus a lot of your time on that. Maybe, like me, you like project architecture a lot and you want to focus more of your time on that, right? It doesn't ultimately matter what the thing is. All that matters is you continuously spend your time improving all of these things in your day-to-day as a React developer. Because the truth is, right, you can never fully learn everything that is about the backend. The backend and just everything in general, computer science, is always evolving. There's always new things happening. There's always old things being deprecated, and staying up to date is as important as being familiar with these things, right? So if you're good on data fetching, stay up to date, keep your knowledge fresh, cycle through, do some more backend, do some more project architecture, find something else that you want to do. Maybe you want to write blog articles. It doesn't ultimately matter. Just focus your time on improving yourself, learning, and continuously making yourself a better React developer. That's honestly the best tip that I can give you. So that's it. That's what I have for this video. If you've enjoyed this video, make sure to leave it a big thumbs up. You can also click here to subscribe, or you can click here to watch a different video of mine that YouTube seems to think that you're really going to enjoy. And with that being said, my name has been Darius Kozin. This is Kozin Solutions. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Ciao, ciao.